Well, the title of the report pretty much sums up what we think of the Alberta government's pension plan. Big risks, no rewards. Given that risks are what you're trying to limit with any pension plan, that's a pretty damning assessment. So let's start with the rationale provided by the government for leaving CPP. They say Alberta has been, quote, over-contributing to CPP to the tune of $5 billion a year and $60 billion since the plan was set up in 1965. They want Albertans to feel indignant about this purported injustice. But here's the thing. Provinces don't contribute to CPP. Individual workers and individual employers do. And individual workers pay exactly the same premiums into CPP, and they get exactly the same benefits out wherever they live in Canada, whether that happens to be in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, Castlegar, British Columbia, or Calgary, Alberta. Put simply, the argument that Albertans are over-contributing to CPP is a myth. It's a carefully constructed fiction designed to make Albertans angry and more receptive to the radical idea of leaving a big, stable pension plan, the CPP, for a smaller, riskier one. That leads to the second major claim being made by the Smith government, namely that Alberta would be entitled to walk away from CPP with 53% of the money that's currently saved in the CPP fund. They say there's a formula in the CPP Act that lays it all out, and that calculating Alberta's entitlement is, to borrow a phrase from our Premier, just math. But as we show in our report, it's not just math. Even LifeWorks, the consultants used by the Alberta government themselves, admit that the formula in the CPP Act doesn't make any sense. That's why they cooked up their own self-described alternative formula, a formula that's never been used by anyone before and that's not accepted or supported by any experts. What the Alberta government doesn't mention is that CPP is jointly run by the federal government and all the provinces minus Quebec. There is absolutely no way that other provinces will allow a province with 12% of the population and 16% of contributions to walk away with 53% of the fund. If Albertans vote to secede from CPP, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure that they don't, but if they do, it would set off a very lengthy round of negotiations and legal wrangling. There would be nothing automatic about it. The final transfer amount would be settled upon, is unclear, but what is clear is that it would be dramatically smaller than the $334 billion touted by the Alberta government in their ad campaigns. If it was a third of that amount, which, by the way, is what University of Calgary economist Trevor Toom has suggested, all of the purported benefits of leaving CPP would evaporate. Premiums would not be lower, benefits would not be higher, and there would be no money to pay for one-time $5,000 or $10,000 retirement bonuses that have been floated by the Alberta government in their ads and on their website. That leads to the third claim being made by the Alberta government, namely that workers and employers would save exactly $1,425 each year if Albertans voted to leave CPP. That number has been repeated ad nauseum by the government and treated as a fact. But here's the problem. All the promises that the Alberta government is making, including the $1,425 promise and the promise to give retirees $5,000 or $10,000 retirement bonuses, they all hinge on the $334 billion transfer amount, which, as we've seen, is not a realistic number. As we say in our report, it's a case of one fantasy number being built on the foundation of another fantasy number. In the glossy leaflet that the government mailed to every Alberta household, they say, and I quote, they would work with partners to develop agreements to allow Albertans to move throughout Canada without impacting their pension benefits. They leave the impression, a deliberate impression, that Alberta would easily and as a matter of course get other provinces to agree to portability agreements similar to those enjoyed by the Quebec pension plan. But once again, as a reminder, CPP is a collective run by the federal government and all the other provinces. A portability agreement that would allow Albertans to live and work in other provinces would have to be negotiated. Given that Alberta's secession from the CPP would mean higher premiums for other provinces, those provinces might not be in the mood to simply cut Alberta the same deal as Quebec. Actions have consequences, and impediments to portability might be one of the consequences of the Alberta government's scheme. Another area where Premier Smith and her colleagues are misleading Albertans is on the subject of demographics. How many of you have heard the Premier and her Minister of Finance say that an Alberta pension plan will always be cheaper than CPP because Alberta will always have a younger population? How many of you have heard that? But here's the thing. Quebec once had a younger population than the rest of the country. That was one of the reasons they chose to set up their own plan instead of joining CPP. And how did that work out? Obviously, Quebec didn't continue to have a younger population, and they were forced to increase pension premiums as a result. There is every reason to believe that the same thing will happen to Alberta. In fact, on page 4 of the LifeWorks report, the government's own consultants admit that it's happening already. They say our demographics are already converging with the rest of the country, and that in the not too distant future, the average age of our population will be no younger than the populations in other provinces. When that happens, we won't be able to keep premiums low. We don't hear about that, though. All we get are sales slogans and best-case scenarios. Changes to CPP have to be approved by 2/3 of all provinces with 2/3 of the population. That's a higher bar than the formula used to amend the Canadian Constitution. And the bar is set that high by design to make it exceedingly difficult for politicians to mess around with the retirement savings of Canadian workers. But with an Alberta pension plan, there would be only one government, the Alberta government, making all the decisions, with no checks or balances. There would be no 2/3 rule. There would be nothing to stop future Alberta governments from making big changes that deviate, perhaps substantially, from CPP's original design. For example, CPP is currently fully indexed for inflation, which is a very important feature, especially during inflationary times like the ones we're currently living through. Would a standalone Alberta plan maintain full indexation? Not necessarily. The Alberta government's pensions for public sector workers are currently only 60% adjusted for inflation. They could do the same for an APP. There would be no one to stop them. Similarly, the CPP currently provides robust disability benefits. And CPP is also in the midst of increasing retirement benefits by 50% for all Canadian workers. Would an Alberta pension plan keep the same level of disability benefits? Would it keep the benefit increases that are currently being phased in into CPP? Once again, they wouldn't have to. They could water down the benefits and there would be no one to stop them. Even more troubling, before she was elected, Premier Danielle Smith publicly mused about raising the retirement age to 70. She has also mused on many occasions about using money in an Alberta pension plan to prop up companies in the oil and gas sector who are having trouble getting cash from global capital markets. Would Albertans have to work until 70 before being eligible to collect retirement benefits? Would their pension savings be used to prop up risky business ventures with low or negative investment returns? None of this would be likely with CPP because other provinces wouldn't let it happen, but with a plan run by one government with no checks and balances, any or all of these things could happen. Do we really want to give Danielle Smith's government, or any future Alberta government, that kind of exclusive power over our retirement savings? The final point I want to highlight from our report has to do with investment performance. Put simply, when it comes to investing, bigger is always better. Over the past decade, CPP has earned returns of 10.9% per year on average. That compares to average returns of 7.9% per year by AIMCO, the Alberta government-owned investment manager that would likely be tapped to run investments for an Alberta pension plan. That difference of 2.7% each year, year on year, is huge. And as we point out in our report, it's enough to wipe out any demographic advantage related to Alberta's younger population. There are three old adages that we at the AFL think should be front and center in the mind of all Albertans as we collectively consider the radical proposal from the Smith government to secede from the Canada Pension Plan. First, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Second, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And third, you often don't appreciate how good something is until it's gone. We think all three adages apply to our current situation. The Alberta government's promises are too good to be true. In fact, it's clear that what we're experiencing is a deliberate campaign of deception and misinformation. Also, CPP is not broken. In fact, it's one of the strongest, most reliable pension plans in the world. And if we left, we would certainly regret it. Every pension expert in the world acknowledges that size matters when it comes to pensions. That's true for investment returns and for risk pooling, which is key to the long-term security of any pension plan. We know that CPP can do the job, but the same could not be said for a plan run by any single province, including Alberta. Again, there's an old adage, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. With the APP, we don't even know if there will be any birds in the bush. I'd like to conclude this morning by restating two of the major conclusions from our report. First, despite claims made by the Alberta government to the contrary, it is not a given that leaving the Canada Pension Plan would lead to lower contribution rates for Albertans or higher benefits. In fact, we think there's every reason to believe that the reverse would be true. The only thing that would be guaranteed with the Alberta government's proposal is higher risk for Albertans, which is the last thing that anyone wants when they're talking about retirement savings. Second, the Alberta government's plan needs to be rejected because it politicizes pensions. CPP investments are well insulated from political interference, but Premier Smith has mused often and openly about viewing a standalone Alberta pension as, and these are her own words, as a pot of money that can and should be used to support pet projects of the government. A scary prospect when we're talking about the retirement savings of millions. It cannot be stated strongly enough that the money saved by Alberta workers through CPP belongs to the workers who saved it, not to Danielle Smith or any other politician. This money has been set aside to provide stable retirement incomes for Albertans and other Canadians, not to act as a political slush fund. Political interference in an Alberta pension plan would reduce future investment returns and create significant deficits in that plan that could lead to future benefit reductions or contribution increases. We simply can't allow that to happen. All of this leaves us with a series of questions for our fellow Albertans. The Alberta government is asking us to trust them. But how can we trust a group that promised during the recent election campaign that they wouldn't touch CPP, but did just that just 3 months later? How can we trust a group that presents highly questionable numbers as facts? And how can we trust a group that seems to have an agenda for how to use our retirement savings that is not solely focused on providing income for retirees? With this report, we in the Alberta Labour Movement have settled on our answers to those questions. We don't trust this government with our pensions, and we don't think our fellow Albertans should trust them either.